The millionaire falls in love with a new employee after a month of intense romance. He invites her to a romantic dinner until a poor girl bursts into the restaurant and whispers to him, "If she asks you to go home, don't. It's dangerous." He ignores the girl, but 2 hours later, 17 police cars show up at his mansion. The plate glass window of Le Ciel was an invisible border between two worlds. Inside, the warm glow of chandeliers danced on wine glasses and silver cutlery, the air thick with the aroma of sophisticated dishes and the soft murmur of civilized conversation. Outside, where little Lena huddled in a recessed doorway, the air was cold and carried the smell of damp asphalt and indifference. At only 7 years old, Lena was already a master in the art of observation. It was a skill forged by necessity, sharpened by hunger and the survival instinct that teaches a street kid to read the world not by what people said, but by what their eyes, hands, and the tension in their shoulders revealed. Her focus wasn't on the plates of food that made her salivate, but on a single table near the window. There sat the man with the salt and pepper hair and the kind smile, Mr. Arthur. He was a familiar face, an island of kindness in an ocean of hurry and disregard. Once a week, he would pass by her alley, and he never failed to stop. He didn't just toss a coin into her can. He would crouch down, look her in the eyes, and ask if she was okay, leaving behind the warmth of his concern long after the sound of his expensive shoes faded. For Lena, that man represented a spark of hope, proof that goodness still existed. And tonight, she felt a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. The reason was sitting across from him. The woman, Isabella, was the picture of perfection, elegant, with a silk dress that seemed to float, and a smile that could disarm armies. She spoke with graceful gestures, leaning toward Arthur with an expression of utter admiration. Arthur, in turn, was visibly enchanted. He, a man who had built an immense fortune from astute investments and ruthless business acumen, seemed unguarded, vulnerable. His vast portfolio, comprised of stocks, real estate, and even a sizable collection of cryptocurrency, had always been a barrier, attracting gold diggers he had learned to spot from a mile away. But Isabella was different. She seemed genuinely interested in him, in his stories, in his dreams, not in the money he possessed. She barely touched on the subject of his wealth, which only captivated him further. He was falling for her, feeling a connection he hadn't experienced in years, and was already planning to take her to his mansion after dinner, a place few had the privilege of seeing. On the other side of the glass, Lena saw past the performance. She saw the way Isabella's smile didn't reach her eyes, the way her gaze subtly swept the restaurant, assessing, calculating. It was a look Lena knew well, the look of a hunter. Her instinct, the silent voice that kept her alive, screamed that something was terribly wrong. This dinner wasn't about romance. It was the stage for a dangerous play, and Mr. Arthur was the only one in the audience who didn't know the plot was a tragedy. Suddenly, a moment that lasted less than a second confirmed her dread. Arthur, laughing at something Isabella said, dropped his linen napkin on the floor. As he bent down to retrieve it, his head disappeared beneath the tablecloth. In that instant, Isabella's face transformed. The warm smile evaporated, replaced by a mask of cold calculation and impatience. Her eyes flashed with an icy hardness as she shot a quick, sharp glance toward the restaurant's entrance. It was a slip, a crack in the flawless facade, but to Lena's trained eyes, it was a confession. As soon as Arthur re-emerged, Isabella's radiant smile was back, perfect as before. But Lena had seen the truth. This serene-faced angel was no angel. She was a predator, and the good man was about to walk into her trap. Lena's heart hammered against her thin ribs, a frantic drum in the growing silence of the street as the last of Le Ciel's patrons departed. She remained motionless in her hiding spot, a miniature statue wrapped in shadows, as she watched Arthur and Isabella emerge from the restaurant. He held her arm with a tenderness that made Lena's stomach churn with anxiety. Under the golden light of the restaurant sign, they looked like a fairy tale couple. He, the successful tycoon whose fortune was the subject of society columns. She, the stunning woman who looked at him with an adoration that Lena now knew was as phony as a $3 bill. A valet brought a long, dark sedan. So polished it reflected the city lights like a black mirror. Arthur, ever the gentleman, opened the door for Isabella. Before getting in, she turned and said something. And though Lena couldn't hear the exact words, the melody of her voice was like honey. Arthur smiled, a genuine, open smile, and replied with something that made her laugh. That sound, which should have been joyous, rang in Lena's ears like a funeral bell. She had to do something, anything, but what? Run up to them, scream a warning. They would see her as she was, a grimy, hungry kid, invisible to most of the world. They would ignore her, or worse, shoo her away like an unwanted animal. The paralysis of fear and helplessness rooted her to the spot. The car door clicked shut with a soft, muffled thud, sealing Arthur's fate. As the car pulled slowly away from the curb, Lena took a step out of the shadows, her body finally obeying the panic in her mind. "Mr. Arthur," she whispered, her voice weak. Lost in the hum of the engine, the car picked up speed, its red taillights becoming two distant dots in the night. She stood in the middle of the sidewalk, the cold of the concrete seeping through her bare feet, feeling a wave of despair so overwhelming it nearly knocked her over. "Don't get involved, kid." The rough, tired voice came from a nearby alley. It was Old Man Jonas, a man whose years were etched on his face like a map of hard roads. He was wrapped in a threadbare blanket, watching her with eyes that had seen it all. "Their world ain't ours. We survive by staying quiet, by staying invisible. Trying to butt in only brings you trouble." Jonas's words were the echo of her own fears, the cold logic of street survival. He was right, but then the memory of a particularly brutal winter night came to Lena's mind. She had been shivering uncontrollably, her teeth chattering, when Mr. Arthur had found her. He hadn't just given her money. He had taken his own cashmere scarf from his neck and wrapped it around her, his large, warm hands gentle. "Stay safe, little one," he had said, his voice full of a concern she rarely heard. That warmth, that kindness, was a debt she felt she had to repay. It wasn't about his money or his portfolio. It was about the man. "But he's a good man, Jonas," she murmured, more to herself than to the old man. "She's going to hurt him." Jonas let out a heavy sigh, a sound of resignation. "Goodness don't buy you protection in this world, girl, especially not in their world, full of deals and people wanting a piece of the pie." The car had now completely vanished. Turning a distant corner, Lena knew where it was headed, toward the hills, where the houses weren't houses but fortresses, hidden behind high walls and iron gates. Mr. Arthur's mansion was a legend among the homeless, a palace rumored to be as big as a city block. How could she, an ant, invade a giant's castle to warn him of a danger he didn't even know existed? The sheer scale of the task crushed her, and for a moment, the darkness of the alley seemed like the only safe place. Lena's instinct, that internal compass that guided her through the city's dangerous streets, was stronger than the voice of reason telling her to back down. Old Man Jonas's advice echoed in her mind, but the image of Arthur's trusting smile being met by Isabella's cold mask was a fire no logic could extinguish. She couldn't just go back to her makeshift shelter and wait. The cashmere scarf he had given her was still among her few possessions, a talisman of kindness that now felt like a call to action. Knowing the city's shortcuts and forgotten alleyways like the back of her small, grimy hand, Lena began to run. Her bare feet made little sound on the asphalt, a nimble shadow moving through the night. She couldn't follow the car, but she knew the way to the mansion district. It was a long, steep journey, a world away from the city center, where the air was cleaner and the streets quieter and darker. Every step was fueled by urgency. She replayed the moment in the restaurant, the subtle shift in Isabella's expression. It wasn't just greed she had seen in her eyes. There was something else, something sharper and more dangerous. It was the look of someone who didn't care about the consequences, as long as their goal was achieved. What could it be? Robbery. But Mr. Arthur was a multimillionaire. His mansion surely had state-of-the-art security. This was something more personal, more sinister. She remembered snippets of conversations she'd overheard on the streets, whispers about crews that specialized in conning the wealthy, using seduction as a weapon to gain access to valuable information, passwords to accounts holding Bitcoin, investment secrets that could yield a fortune. The climb grew steeper, and her lungs began to burn. The city sprawled below her like a carpet of twinkling lights, a universe away from her panting reality. She passed imposing gates and ivy-covered walls, each property an impenetrable fortress. Finally, she recognized the entrance to Arthur's estate. It was just as the legends described, a wrought-iron gate with a crest in the center, flanked by stone walls so high they seemed to touch the sky. His car was already inside, parked in front of a massive oak door. The mansion's lights were on, casting a welcoming glow on the perfectly manicured lawn. From her position, hidden behind a shrub across the street, everything looked normal, peaceful. She almost doubted herself. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe exhaustion and hunger were playing tricks on her. Then she saw it. A second car, a dark, unmarked sedan, was parked a little further down the street, in a spot where the streetlights failed. Its headlights were off, a predator lying in wait. It wasn't a car that belonged in this neighborhood. Its windows were too dark, its presence too menacing. The driver's side door opened, and a man got out. He wasn't a private security guard. He lacked the uniform and the posture. He wore dark clothes and a baseball cap that shadowed his face. He looked toward Arthur's mansion, pulled a cell phone from his pocket, and appeared to send a message. Lena's heart sank. It wasn't her imagination. This was real. Isabella wasn't alone. She was the bait, the key that would open the door for the wolves waiting outside. That man was the confirmation that the plan, whatever it was already in motion. The mansion's security, however advanced, would be useless if the threat was already inside, smiling and pouring a glass of wine for its victim. Lena was trapped on the outside, a helpless witness to a silent invasion. The distance between her and the front door felt like an uncrossable chasm. She had to find a way across it to make her warning heard before it was too late. Panic threatened to suffocate Lena, but the discipline of the streets took over. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. Analyze, adapt, act. That's how she survived. The wall was too high to climb, the front gate an impassable barrier of iron. She needed another way in, a weak point in Arthur's fortress. Scurrying along the perimeter of the property, keeping to the shadows cast by leafy trees, she searched for a flaw. Her eyes scanned every inch of the stone wall, looking for a loose grate, a drainage opening, anything. And then she found it, near the back of the property, where the manicured garden met a wilder hillside. There was an old service grate, overgrown with vines and almost completely hidden from view. It looked like it hadn't been used in years. The iron bars were corroded with rust, and one of them, near the bottom, was loose. With an effort that took all her strength, Lena managed to pry the rusted bar aside, creating a narrow opening just large enough for her small body. She squeezed through the gap, scratching her arms and tearing the sleeve of her worn-out shirt. Once inside, she found herself in a garden that looked like something out of a storybook. There were hedge mazes, whispering fountains, and beds of roses whose perfume filled the night air. For an instant, the beauty of the place distracted her. A world of peace and order that contrasted violently with the urgency of her mission. But the glow of the main house brought her back to reality. Crouching low, moving from bush to bush, she crept closer to the mansion. The walls were glass in many places, offering glimpses of the interior. In a large living room, with a crackling fireplace and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, she saw them. Arthur and Isabella were sitting on a plush sofa, wine glasses in hand. He was talking, his face animated, gesturing as he told a story. Isabella listened intently, her face a portrait of devotion. The scene was so domestically perfect that Lena felt another pang of doubt. But then she noticed a tiny detail. Isabella's hand, the one not holding the wineglass, rested on her designer handbag beside her. Her fingers tapped impatiently on the leather surface, a nervous rhythm that completely betrayed her relaxed posture, and her eyes, though fixed on Arthur, occasionally flickered to the gold watch on her wrist. She was waiting. Time was running out. Lena crawled around the house, looking for a way in or a way to make enough noise to get attention without alerting the men she was sure were waiting outside. Most windows were shut, the doors locked. She reached a sliding glass door that led to the kitchen. It was closed, but not locked. Probably a door used by the staff during the day. Forgotten in the rush at the end of a shift, her heart leaped. This was her chance. Holding her breath, she slid the door open slowly, an inch at a time, the sound almost imperceptible. Warm air and the faint smell of coffee from inside washed over her. She slipped into the dark kitchen, a vast, silent room full of stainless steel appliances that gleamed in the dim light from the living room. She was inside. The first hurdle was cleared. Now came the hardest part, confronting the man she came to save, a billionaire in his own home, and convincing him that the beautiful woman beside him was a dangerous fraud. How could she, a street kid, do that? Her appearance, her clothes, her very existence in this place were an anomaly. Would he listen to her, or would he turn her over to security, thinking she was just a thief? She took a step out of the kitchen, toward the hallway that led to the living room. Arthur's voice carried to her, full of warmth and confidence. "You know, Isabella, I feel like I can tell you anything. Talk about my business, my investments, even the location of some valuable assets. I feel like I've finally found someone I can trust completely." Lena's blood ran cold. This was it. She wasn't here to steal jewelry or cash. She was after information, information that could destroy the empire Arthur had spent a lifetime building. Arthur's words hung in the air, freighted with a cruel irony only Lena could comprehend. Trust completely. Each syllable was a nail in the coffin of his security. Lena remained motionless in the gloom of the hallway, her heart pounding. She had to interrupt them, but the scene before her was a paralyzing tableau. Arthur was completely absorbed, his eyes fixed on Isabella, revealing vulnerabilities that could cost him his fortune. And Isabella, sensing her advantage, leaned subtly forward, her face a mask of empathy and understanding. "Oh, Arthur, that means so much to me," she said, her voice a velvety whisper. "To know you feel safe with me is all I could ever wish for. Your trust is the most precious asset you could offer me." The hypocrisy was so thick, Lena could almost touch it. She clenched her fists, the dirt under her nails digging into her skin. The time for hiding was over. With a deep breath that failed to calm the tremor in her body, she stepped out of the hallway and into the soft light of the living room. The sound of her bare feet on the Persian rug was minimal, but in the quiet of their intimate conversation, it was enough. Arthur turned first. His expression of bliss dissolved, replaced by stunned confusion. His eyes widened as he saw the small, disheveled figure standing at the entrance to his living room. "Lena?" he said, his voice full of disbelief. "What? How did you get in here?" Isabella turned more slowly, and for a split second, before she could recompose her facade, Lena saw the flash of panic and fury in her eyes. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by an expression of baffled concern. "Arthur, darling, who is this child?" she asked, her voice laced with just the right amount of alarm. "Is she all right?" "Stay away from him," Lena's voice came out louder and steadier than she expected. She pointed a trembling finger at Isabella. "She's lying. She's not who she says she is." The silence that followed was heavy and uncomfortable. Arthur looked from Lena to Isabella, his mind struggling to process the surreal situation. A street girl he helped out of charity had somehow broken into his home to accuse the woman he was falling for. Lena. "Calm down," Arthur said, rising slowly from the sofa. He used the gentle tone he always used with her, but there was an edge of disbelief in his voice. "What's going on? Are you in trouble?" "She's the trouble," Lena insisted, taking a step forward. "I saw her at the restaurant. Her face changed when you weren't looking. And there's a car outside waiting, men waiting." Isabella let out a soft, sad little laugh. She stood and walked to Arthur's side, placing a comforting hand on his arm. "Oh, you poor dear," she said, looking at Lena with staged compassion. "The girl is clearly frightened and confused. Perhaps she's delusional. We should call someone to help her." Her words were poison disguised as honey. She was painting Lena as an unstable child, a delusional intruder whose words were worthless. And it was working. Lena saw the doubt deepen in Arthur's eyes. He was torn between logic, a sophisticated, charming woman versus a poor, frightened child, and the strange sincerity in Lena's desperation. "Lena, I don't understand," Arthur said, his confusion turning to frustration. "This makes no sense. Why would you say these things?" "Because it's true," Lena cried, tears beginning to well in her eyes. "She's going to hurt you. She wants your money, your passwords. She wants everything." Isabella shook her head, a look of profound sadness on her face. "Arthur, this is too much. The child needs help. Let me call security." She reached for her handbag, the same one she had been anxiously watching, but Lena knew she wasn't calling security. It was the signal to the men outside that the plan was compromised and they needed to act now. Isabella's move toward her purse was the catalyst. The time for words and persuasion was over. Lena's instinct screamed that this gesture was the point of no return. Without a second thought, she ran. Not toward Arthur, but toward the large glass wall overlooking the back garden, the same way she had come in. "Don't let her use her phone!" Lena yelled over her shoulder, her high-pitched voice echoing in the lavish room. Arthur, still paralyzed by confusion, just watched as the small figure darted across the room. Isabella, however, reacted instantly. The mask of compassion fell away, revealing the predator beneath. With surprising agility, she moved to intercept Lena, but the girl was faster, her small, nimble body used to darting through tight spaces. Lena reached the heavy drapes covering the glass wall and, with all the strength she could muster, yanked on them violently. The metal track groaned in protest, and with a tremendous crash, the entire curtain rod came down, taking a ceramic vase on a nearby pedestal with it. The vase shattered on the marble floor with a deafening boom. The sound was like a grenade exploding in the tense silence of the mansion. It was the chaos Lena needed to create. Outside, the loud, sudden noise broke the stillness of the night. The man waiting in the dark sedan heard it and knew instantly that the quiet plan had failed. He grabbed his radio. "She's been made. Plan B. Go in through the back, now." Inside the mansion, the noise finally snapped Arthur out of his stupor. The sight of the fallen drapes and shattered vase, combined with the look of pure fury on Isabella's face, began to eat away at the fog of enchantment that had enveloped him. "What the hell is going on, Isabella?" he demanded, his tone finally hardening, but Isabella ignored him. Her eyes were locked on Lena, who was now backing away toward the kitchen. "You little pest!" Isabella hissed, the venom in her voice no longer disguised. "You've ruined everything." She lunged toward Lena, but Arthur, moving faster than Lena had ever seen him move, stepped between them. "Enough!" he snarled, grabbing Isabella's arm. "Answer me!" His touch seemed to break her spell. She stopped, breathing heavily, and forced a shaky smile. "Arthur, darling, I don't know. This girl breaks into your home. She's destroying your things. I was only trying to protect you." But the conviction in her voice was gone. The doubt in Arthur's eyes was now a burgeoning suspicion. He looked at Lena, who was huddled near the kitchen doorway, her eyes wide with fear, but also a fierce determination. He saw her hand, where she clutched a shard of the broken vase, the sharp edge pointed outward, a makeshift weapon. She didn't look like a delusional child. She looked like a cornered soldier. At that exact moment, a sound of breaking glass came from the back of the house, followed by muffled male voices. Isabella's face went white. The car outside, the men waiting. Lena's words suddenly clicked into place with a terrible, undeniable clarity. "They're here," Lena whispered, genuine terror in her voice. Arthur released Isabella's arm and stared in the direction of the sound. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He wasn't hosting a romantic evening. He was the target of a carefully planned home invasion. And the only thing standing between him and the invaders was a 7-year-old girl he barely knew. He turned to Isabella, and for the first time, he truly saw her. Not the charming, intelligent woman, but the cold, calculating lure. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Before she could answer, 2 men dressed in black emerged from the hallway, coming from the direction of the kitchen. Plan B was in motion. The charade was over. The real threat had arrived. The entrance of the 2 men turned the tension into imminent danger. They were not common burglars. They moved with a trained efficiency, their eyes scanning the room, assessing the situation. One, more heavy-set, carried plastic zip ties. The other, more lithe, held an object that looked like a small electronic device. Arthur's house of cards collapsed in an instant. Isabella's betrayal was now a sharp, undeniable truth. His mind, accustomed to calculating risks in business and the stock market, went into crisis mode. His first instinct was to protect Lena. "Get behind me," he ordered, his voice firm, pushing the girl behind his legs as he positioned himself between her and the intruders. "Isabella, what is this madness? Call it off now," he said, still clinging to the vain hope that this could be some kind of misunderstanding. Isabella laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth. "Oh, Arthur, always so naive. Did you really think I was interested in your boring stories about mutual funds and dividends? I want access to your vault, your passwords, the keys to your crypto wallets, everything." The more agile man stepped forward. "We have little time, boss. The house's silent alarm was tripped when we broke the pantry window. The cops should be on their way, but we've got 10, maybe 15 minutes. The revelation that help was coming gave Arthur a spark of hope, but 10 minutes in the hands of these men felt like an eternity. "I'm not giving you anything," Arthur said, his voice low and defiant. The heavy-set man moved forward. "We don't need you to give it. We just need you to be quiet." He moved to grab Arthur, but something unexpected happened. Lena, who had been hiding behind Arthur, shot out to the side. She moved with the speed of a startled mouse, not toward an exit, but toward the fireplace. On the wall above the mantel, there was a series of switches, one for the lights, another for a built-in sound system, and a third, red and inconspicuous, that Arthur had installed years ago and had all but forgotten about. A panic button, hardwired directly to a private security firm and the local police precinct, designed for this exact kind of extreme situation. He never imagined he'd use it, and neither he nor the intruders paid the girl any mind until it was too late. Before anyone could react, Lena leaped onto a small wooden stool, stretched out her thin arm, and with the palm of her hand slammed the red button with all her might. A deafening alarm began to shriek throughout the mansion, a piercing, high-pitched wail, accompanied by red strobe lights that began to flash, plunging the room into a pulsating chaos of light and sound. The reversal was instantaneous and dramatic. The intruder's element of surprise had evaporated. The quiet, controlled operation had become a pandemonium. "The girl!" Isabella screamed, her face contorted with rage. "Get her!" The agile man turned toward Lena, but Arthur wasn't having it. With a burst of adrenaline, he threw himself at the man, using his weight to tackle him. They crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs, a struggle for control playing out under the flashing red lights. The heavy-set man hesitated, torn between helping his partner and following the order to get Lena. That hesitation was all Lena needed. She jumped off the stool and ran, not outside, but deeper into the house, into the labyrinthine corridors she didn't know, guided only by the instinct to get away from the danger. The alarm continued to howl, a beacon of hope and a timer on the criminals. Desperation. Their plan was in ruins. The girl they had dismissed as a minor complication had become the instrument of their defeat, single-handedly changing the course of the night with one brave act. Now, it was a race against time. The criminals needed to escape before the police arrived, and Arthur needed to survive until they did. And Lena, alone and lost somewhere in the massive mansion, had just become the primary target of their fury. The sound of the alarm was a physical force, vibrating through the floor and walls, amplifying the panic that had seized the room. Arthur grappled on the floor with the agile intruder, a clumsy, desperate struggle. Years spent behind a desk had left him at a disadvantage against a younger man prepared for violence. Yet, the resolve to protect the child who had saved him gave him a strength he didn't know he possessed. He managed to pin one of the man's arms under his body, but the other was free, driving punches into his ribs. Across the room, the heavy-set man finally made a decision. Leave Arthur and go after Lena. He strode past the struggle, his eyes fixed on the dark hallway where the girl had vanished. Forget the old man. The kid can't get out of here. She saw our faces, Isabella yelled over the deafening noise. Her own composure was unraveling, the fear of getting caught replacing her cold arrogance. She ran to a window, peering out, expecting to see the lights of squad cars at any second. Lena, meanwhile, was running blind. The hallway split in two, and she chose the one on the left, which led her into an area that appeared to be a library. The walls were lined with books from floor to ceiling, and the smell of old paper and leather filled the air. It was a dead end. She heard the heavy footsteps of the large man echoing in the hall. Getting closer, icy panic rose in her throat. She looked around, desperate for a hiding place. There was a rolling library ladder in one corner and a massive oak desk in the center. Under the desk, it was her only option. She dove under the heavy desk, curling into a tight ball in the dark space, trying to control her ragged breathing so she wouldn't make a sound. The man entered the library, his large frame blocking the light from the hallway. "Come on out, little mouse. We just want to talk," he said, his voice falsely calm, which made it all the more terrifying. He began to move around the room, his steps slow and deliberate. Lena could see his black shoes pass by the edge of the desk. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying he wouldn't look down. Back in the living room, Arthur managed to use a moment of imbalance to roll on top of his opponent. He wasn't a fighter, but he was heavier. He used that advantage to pin the man to the floor. "It's over! The police are coming!" Arthur gasped. The man beneath him spat and laughed. "You think this is over? Even if we get caught, the boss won't forget. And that little street friend of yours, she's a loose end that will be tied up." The veiled threat against Lena sent a wave of fury through Arthur. He was no longer fighting for his assets or his portfolio. He was fighting for an innocent child's life. In the library, the man stopped. The silence stretched, broken only by the incessant wail of the alarm. Lena held her breath, her heart feeling like it would burst from her chest. He was so close she could smell his cheap cologne. Suddenly, he crouched down. Lena's eyes flew open and met his, a cruel smile spreading across his lips as he looked directly at her. "I found you." He reached a large arm under the desk to grab her. In that instant, Lena didn't scream. Her survival instinct, forged in countless dangerous situations on the streets, took over. She threw herself sideways, rolling out from the other side of the desk. The man, caught off guard by her speed, was thrown off balance as he reached for her. As she scrambled to her feet, Lena grabbed the only thing within reach, a heavy, leather-bound book on the edge of the desk. With a cry that was part fear and part defiance, she raised the book over her head and swung it with all her might into the man's face. The corner of the book caught him on the temple with a dull thud. He grunted in pain and surprise, staggering back, one hand flying to the side of his head. That moment of distraction was all she needed. She bolted from the library, back into the hall, not knowing where she was going, only that she had to keep moving. But as she rounded the corner into the main hallway, she ran straight into Isabella, who was waiting for her. The encounter in the hallway was an electric shock for them both. For a second, Lena and Isabella were frozen, hunter and prey facing each other under the pulsing red lights. Isabella's eyes, once cold and calculating, now burned with a feverish desperation. To her, Lena was no longer just an obstacle. She was the embodiment of her impending failure, the one witness who could tie her directly to this and ruin her life. "You're not going anywhere," Isabella said, her voice low and tight, taking a step forward to block the path. Lena backed away instinctively, her heart racing. She was trapped. Behind her, the sound of the man in the library recovering. In front of her, the woman who had orchestrated this whole nightmare. There was nowhere to run. Meanwhile, in the living room, Arthur's struggle continued. The intruder, realizing his partner was taking too long, redoubled his efforts, managing to throw off Arthur's weight and get to his feet. He pulled a small knife from his pocket, the blade glinting ominously in the strobing lights. "I didn't want to have to do this, old man," he said, advancing. "But you and your little friend didn't give us much choice." Arthur scrambled backward, grabbing a brass fire poker from the hearth, his only defense against the blade. The mismatch was clear, a businessman versus a hardened criminal. The situation looked bleak. In the hallway, Isabella closed in on Lena slowly, like a cat approaching a cornered bird. "You should have stayed in your alley, you little stray," she hissed. "People like you have no place in the world of people like us. You should have learned to stay invisible." The words were cruel, meant to diminish and terrify, but they had the opposite effect. They ignited a spark of defiance in Lena. She had spent her entire life being treated as invisible, as if she didn't matter. But Mr. Arthur had seen her. He had treated her like a person, and for him, she would not back down. "He saw you, too," Lena retorted, her voice surprisingly steady. "He saw who you really are." The truth in those simple words seemed to strike a nerve, fueling Isabella's rage. She lunged forward to grab Lena, but at that moment, the heavy-set man stumbled out of the library, hand still pressed to his temple where a lump was beginning to form. "The little brat got me," he snarled, fury twisting his face. His arrival split Isabella's attention, giving Lena the opening she needed. She didn't try to get past them. Instead, she turned and ran in the opposite direction, back toward the living room, back toward the epicenter of the danger. It was a move that defied logic, but Lena's instinct told her that her only chance was to stick close to Arthur. Separated, they were vulnerable. Together, they might have a chance. She burst into the living room just in time to see the knife-wielding man backing Arthur toward the fireplace. Without hesitating, she acted. She saw, on the floor near the sofa, the heavy designer handbag Isabella had dropped. Adrenaline pumping through her, she ran, grabbed the purse by its strap, and swinging her body for momentum, flung it with all her might at the back of the man with the knife. The unexpected weight of the bag, filled with who knows what, hit him squarely, causing him to stumble forward. The momentary imbalance was the opportunity Arthur needed. He surged forward, not attacking but pushing. He threw his full weight against the man, shoving him sideways, away from the fireplace. The man fell clumsily onto a glass coffee table, which shattered under the impact. Isabella and the other henchmen entered the living room just in time to see their accomplice down amidst the shards of glass, the knife skittering away. And then, above the shrieking alarm, a new sound joined the cacophony: sirens. Distant at first, but growing louder, closer. It was the most beautiful sound Lena had ever heard. The tables had turned. Help was on its way. For Arthur and Lena, it was the sound of salvation. For Isabella and her men, it was the sound of the end of the line. The wail of the sirens acted like a chemical catalyst, changing the room's dynamic instantly. The panic in the criminals' eyes was palpable. Their time had irrevocably run out. "We gotta go, now!" shouted the heavy-set man, bolting for the back door through which they had entered. The one on the floor scrambled up from the broken glass, limping and cursing, and followed him. But Isabella didn't move. She stood frozen, her face a mask of disbelief and rage. Her meticulous plan, months of seduction and manipulation to gain access to Arthur's vast capital, undone by one insignificant child. In her mind, this wasn't just a failure, it was an unbearable humiliation. Her eyes locked onto Lena, who was now standing beside Arthur near the fireplace. There was a hatred so pure and intense in that gaze, it sent a shiver down Lena's spine. "This isn't over," Isabella said, her voice low and laced with a menacing promise. Then she turned and ran, not after her accomplices, but toward a side door that led to the garage. She knew the layout of the house. She had studied every exit. Outside, the sirens grew deafening, the sound enveloping the mansion. Red and blue lights began to dance through the windows, painting the walls in strobing flashes. Arthur pulled Lena close, a protective arm around her shoulders. "You did it, Lena," he whispered, his voice thick with awe and relief. "You saved us." At that moment, the front door burst open with a crash, and uniformed police officers swarmed into the room, guns drawn. "Police! Hands where I can see them!" the lead officer shouted. The scene that greeted them was one of utter chaos. A luxurious living room in complete disarray, a wealthy man and a street girl standing amidst the destruction, and the sound of a blaring alarm. Quickly, Arthur explained the situation, pointing in the directions the intruders had fled. Part of the team gave chase, while others began securing the scene. A paramedic was called to check on Arthur, who had a few cuts and bruises, but nothing serious. Arthur's attention, however, wasn't on himself. It was on Lena. She was trembling, the adrenaline beginning to give way to shock and exhaustion. The courage that had sustained her through the ordeal was draining away, revealing the terrified child underneath. He knelt in front of her, ignoring the paramedic's protests. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. Lena just nodded, unable to speak. Her big, frightened eyes were taking in everything. The police officers, the uniforms, the guns. For a street kid, the police were not necessarily a source of comfort. They often represented danger, someone to hide from. Arthur saw her fear. "It's okay now," he assured her. "They're here to help. You're safe." A senior officer, a tired-looking but kind-faced detective named Miller, approached them. "Mr. Blackwood, can we have a word? And we'll need to speak with the young lady as well." Arthur stood up, subtly placing himself between the detective and Lena. "She's been through a terrible trauma, detective. Be gentle." "Of course, sir," Miller said, his gaze softening as it landed on Lena. "Hello there, young lady. My name is Detective Miller. You were incredibly brave tonight. Did you know that?" Lena looked at the floor, abashed by the attention. She didn't feel brave. She felt small and out of place. Word began to crackle over the police radios. The two henchmen had been apprehended in the back gardens, trying to scale the wall, but Isabella was gone. She had made it to the garage, taken one of Arthur's luxury cars, and smashed through the gate before the first patrol cars could block the exit. She was in the wind. The news landed like a stone in Arthur's stomach. The immediate threat was over, but the real danger, the mind behind it all, was still out there. and she knew who Lena was. The menacing promise in her eyes before she fled had not been a bluff. Lena, the hero of the night, had just become a target. The victory they had won in that room was only the beginning of a longer, more dangerous battle. The arrival of the police marked the end of the siege, but the beginning of a different kind of ordeal. The mansion, once a sanctuary of quiet luxury, transformed into a hive of official activity. Forensics teams dusted for prints and took photos, while uniformed officers took statements. Amidst it all, Lena felt smaller and more out of place than ever. She sat in a soft armchair, wrapped in a blanket a paramedic had given her, but the expensive fabric couldn't ward off the chill she felt deep inside. Every time an officer approached, she flinched. Years of living in the shadows had taught her to be wary of authority figures. To her, they were the ones who broke up homeless encampments, who asked hard questions she didn't have answers for. Arthur, sensing her distress, remained by her side like a sentinel. He refused to leave her alone, even when Detective Miller tried to question her formally. "She will talk when she's ready," Arthur stated, his voice firm, "and with a counselor present. For now, she is my guest and under my protection." That declaration, made in front of everyone, was a pivotal moment. He didn't see her as a witness or a piece of an investigation. He saw her as a person to whom he owed everything. The word protection hung in the air, heavy with new meaning. With Isabella on the loose, Lena's safety became Arthur's absolute priority. He spent the next few hours on the phone, not with his stockbrokers or business managers, but with the best lawyers and security experts in the city. He was building a legal and physical fortress around the girl. Meanwhile, Lena watched the proceedings with tired eyes. She saw the two henchmen led away in handcuffs. The look one of them gave her as he passed was filled with a poisonous resentment that made her shiver. The threat wasn't just Isabella. It was the entire network she belonged to. In the days that followed, Lena's life changed irrevocably. She did not return to the streets. Arthur insisted she stay at the mansion, in a guest suite that was larger than all the shelters she had ever slept in combined. It was filled with toys she didn't know how to play with and soft clothes that felt strange on her skin. It was a world of comfort and abundance, but it was also a world of confinement. For her safety, she could not leave. The windows that once offered stunning views now felt like the bars of a gilded cage. Arthur did his best to make her feel at home. He hired a gentle tutor, a woman named Helena, who began to teach her how to read and write. He sat with her at meals, telling her stories not of his multi-million-dollar deals, but of his own childhood, trying to build a bridge between their two vastly different worlds. But a shadow loomed over everything, the approaching court case. The district attorney made it clear that Lena's testimony was vital. She was the only one who could detail the beginning of the evening, the only one who could describe the shift in Isabella's expression, the eyewitness who linked the romantic sham to the attempted crime. The thought of standing in a courtroom, in front of strangers, being the center of attention, was terrifying for Lena. It was the opposite of everything she knew, which was invisibility and anonymity. One night, she had a nightmare. She was back in the alley, but Isabella was there, waiting in the shadows, that cruel smile on her face. Lena woke with a strangled cry, her heart pounding. Arthur, who had been passing her room, heard and came in. He found her sitting up in bed, hugging her knees, trembling. He didn't say anything. He just sat on the edge of the bed and stayed with her, his silent presence a comfort in the dark. "They said I have to talk," Lena whispered, her voice choked. "In court." "Yes," Arthur said softly. "They did. I don't know if I can," she admitted, the vulnerability in her voice breaking his heart. "I'm scared." Arthur thought for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Lena, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the right thing even when you're scared, and you are the bravest person I have ever met." She looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. The faith he had in her was both a burden and a blessing. She had saved his life and his fortune. But now he was asking her to face her greatest fear, to ensure justice was served. The coming challenge would not be fought in a mansion with intruders, but in a quiet courtroom, where the weapons would be words and the battlefield would be her own terrified soul. The weeks leading up to the trial were a blur of preparation and anxiety. Arthur's mansion, once a symbol of his wealth and success, became a fortified sanctuary. Security guards discreetly patrolled the perimeter, and every visitor was rigorously screened. It was a safe environment, but the tension was almost palpable. Lena spent her days with Helena, the tutor, making remarkable progress with her literacy. The letters, once meaningless squiggles, began to form words, and the words, stories. In the midst of the uncertainty, books became her refuge, a place where she could escape to other worlds. Arthur, for his part, was immersed in a battle on multiple fronts. He worked tirelessly with his legal team, not only to build the case against Isabella, who had finally been captured trying to flee the country and her network, but also to secure Lena's legal protection. He initiated the process of becoming her legal guardian, a move that would give him the authority to make decisions on her behalf and shield her from a social services system that could be overwhelming and impersonal. His lawyers prepped her for the testimony. They ran simulations in a conference room that had been set up to look like a courtroom. A kindly lawyer named Mr. Davies played the part of the prosecutor, asking questions in a calm voice, while another, sterner one, played the defense attorney, trying to trip her up. For Lena, each session was torture, reliving the night of the attack, describing the fear she felt, all under the watchful eyes of strangers, was exhausting. Often she would shut down, responding in monosyllables or just shaking her head, unable to verbalize the terror. "Don't worry, Lena," Mr. Davies would say patiently. "Just tell your story. The truth is your strongest weapon." But the truth felt so fragile against the enormity of what she would face. Isabella's defense was already taking shape in the media. She painted herself as a victim, a woman in love who was caught in the middle of a robbery she was not a part of. And Lena was portrayed as an unstable and fanciful street child, manipulated by Arthur to corroborate his story. Finally, the day of the trial arrived. The courthouse was an imposing building of marble and dark wood, designed to intimidate and inspire awe. As she walked in, clutching Arthur's hand tightly, Lena felt like an ant entering a cathedral. The courtroom was packed, reporters with their notepads, lawyers with their leather briefcases, and at the defendant's table, Isabella. She looked completely different, dressed in a conservative business suit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked like a serious professional, not a glamorous seductress. Her eyes met Lena's for an instant, and in them was not rage, but a cold, dismissive contempt, a silent message that said, "No one will ever believe you." When it was Lena's turn to testify, every step to the witness stand felt like an eternity. She sat in the chair, which was too big for her, the courtroom lights feeling like spotlights. The prosecutor began with simple questions about her name, her age. Lena's voice was a nearly inaudible whisper. Then, the defense attorney rose for the cross-examination. He was a tall man with a booming voice that filled the room. "Miss Lena," he began, his tone condescending, "is it true that you lived on the streets? That you often went hungry?" "Yes," Lena whispered. "And when a person is hungry and cold, wouldn't they do almost anything for a warm bed and a hot meal? Wouldn't they, perhaps, tell a story that a rich, powerful man wanted to hear?" "Objection," the prosecutor said. "Sustained," the judge replied, but the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted with the jury. The lawyer continued, twisting her words, questioning her memory, her perception. Lena began to falter, her answers growing more hesitant. The fear was winning. She glanced at Arthur, who sat in the front row, his face tight with concern. He gave her a slight nod, a gesture of encouragement. Then she looked at Isabella, who was smirking. In that moment, something inside Lena shifted. It wasn't anger, but a sudden clarity. She remembered the warm scarf in winter, Arthur's kind smile, Isabella's cold mask in the restaurant. She wasn't here to tell Arthur's story. She was here to tell her own. She sat up straighter in the chair. The defense attorney asked another leading question. "How can we be sure you didn't just imagine this all?" Lena took a deep breath and looked directly at the jury. Her voice, when she spoke, was no longer a whisper. It was clear and steady. "I don't have much," she said. But I know the difference between the face of someone who wants to help and the face of someone who wants to hurt. I saw both of them that night." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. The simple, raw sincerity of her words carried more weight than any complex legal argument. She was no longer afraid. She had found her voice. Lena's testimony was the turning point of the trial. Her raw, unshakable authenticity resonated through the courtroom, dismantling the defense's carefully constructed narrative. The jury, which had previously seen a potentially impressionable street child, now saw an eyewitness whose credibility stemmed from a lifetime of reading people's intentions to survive. After her testimony, the pieces of the prosecutor's puzzle began to fit perfectly. Phone records connected Isabella to a known criminal network specializing in high-net-worth individuals. Financial transactions revealed she had received a substantial payment weeks before applying for the job at Arthur's company, proving her approach was premeditated. The two henchmen, facing the prospect of long sentences, finally broke. In exchange for a plea deal, they confessed everything, detailing the plan to seduce Arthur, gain access to his mansion, and coerce him into transferring a significant portion of his assets, including a large sum in euros and Bitcoin, to offshore accounts. Their testimony corroborated every detail of Lena's story. The verdict, when it came, was no surprise. Isabella and her accomplices were found guilty on all counts. As the judge read the sentence, long prison terms for all of them, Isabella remained impassive, her face an icy mask. But when her eyes met Lena's one last time, there was a flicker of grudging acknowledgement, the recognition that she had been defeated not by the system or the police, but by the courage of a single child she had tragically underestimated. Leaving the courthouse was like emerging from a long, dark tunnel. The sunlight seemed brighter, the air fresher. Arthur placed a hand on Lena's shoulder, a gesture of pride and gratitude that said more than words. The first victory, saving his life, had cost Lena her anonymity, but the second victory, seeing justice done, had given her something in return, a sense of agency and purpose she never knew she possessed. In the following days, the final pieces of her life's transformation fell into place. The last of the guardianship paperwork was approved. Arthur Blackwood, the billionaire tycoon, officially became Lena's legal guardian. It was not an act of charity, but an act of family. He was no longer just a benefactor. He was her protector, her mentor, her father in all the ways that mattered. The mansion, which had once been a gilded cage, began to feel like a home. The dark corners that once scared her were now places to read a book. The silence that once oppressed her was now filled with the sound of her laughter as she and Arthur played board games in front of the fireplace. The transition was not without its challenges. Lena still had nightmares sometimes. She still startled at loud noises. The scars of her past would not fade overnight. But now she was not alone. She had Arthur to talk to, Helena to comfort her, and the security of knowing she would never again have to worry about where she would sleep or where her next meal would come from. One afternoon, Arthur brought her to his home office, a sprawling room with a view of the city. He showed her charts and spreadsheets, explaining in simple terms about his businesses, about how money, used correctly, could be a tool for good. "Lena," he said, "you taught me an invaluable lesson. I spent my life building an empire of assets and investments, but I nearly lost it all because I failed to see what was right in front of me. You taught me that a person's greatest asset isn't in their holdings, but in their character." He then showed her the plans for a new project, the Blackwood Foundation for At-Risk Youth. It would be a program designed to help children like her, offering not just shelter and food, but education, emotional support, and mentorship. "And I want you to help me," he said. "Your voice, your experience, is more valuable than all my capital. Together, we can make sure other children get the chance you never had." At that moment, looking out at the city skyline, Lena understood. Her journey had taken her from the darkest shadows into the brightest light. The girl who fought for scraps was now in a position to help change the world. 3 exact weeks had passed since the chaotic night that had woven their fates together. The city, once a labyrinth of dangers for Lena, now unfolded before her like a map of new possibilities. The stage for her new life was Westbridge Academy, a private school with verdant lawns and ivy-covered brick buildings, a universe away from the cracked pavement and alleyways she had known. Dressed in a crisp uniform that still felt a little strange, Lena sat at a wooden desk, the afternoon sun slanting through the window and warming her face. In front of her, a math textbook lay open. The equations, which just weeks before would have been indecipherable hieroglyphics, were now beginning to make sense. She wasn't the best student in the class, nor the quickest, but she possessed a quiet determination that impressed her teachers. It was the same grit that had kept her alive on the streets, now channeled into absorbing all the knowledge she could. Beside her, a classmate, a girl with braided hair named Chloe, leaned over and whispered, "Did you get number 7? Lena glanced at the equation, thought for a moment, and with a pen, showed Chloe the step she was missing. A small smile of understanding lit up Chloe's face. "Oh, I get it now. Thanks, Lena." In that simple moment of exchange, something profound happened. For the first time in her life, Lena wasn't the recipient of help, but the giver. She wasn't invisible. She was a classmate, a friend. After school, Arthur was waiting for her outside, leaning against his car. Not the flashy sedan, but a more understated vehicle. He didn't look like a billionaire visiting an elite school. He just looked like a dad waiting for his daughter. The smile he gave her was genuine, filled with an affection that had deepened with each passing day. "How was school?" he asked, opening the door for her. "It was good," Lena replied, climbing in. "I helped Chloe with math." Arthur beamed. "I knew you were smart." Instead of going straight home, they drove downtown to a modest office building that housed the newly established headquarters of the Blackwood Foundation. Inside, in a bright conference room, they met with social workers and city planners. Arthur introduced Lena not as his ward, but as his senior consultant. With a seriousness that belied her age, Lena spoke. She didn't use business jargon or technical terms. She spoke about the cold, about the hunger. She spoke about the importance of having a safe place to keep your few belongings. She spoke about the fear of being invisible to the world, yet terribly visible to danger. Her words, born from lived experience, gave a soul to the project, transforming it from an exercise in philanthropy into a human mission. The tycoon who built a fortune on numbers and market predictions learned from her that the most profitable investment was in humanity. He discovered that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars or Bitcoin, but in the ability to make a difference. The girl who lived in shadows discovered that her voice, once a whisper lost in the city, had the power to build bridges and inspire change. As they left the building that evening, they passed the alley where Arthur had found her so many times. It was empty now, swept clean by the night breeze. Lena paused for a moment, looking at the space that had been her entire world. There was no sadness in her gaze, only a quiet reflection. That place no longer defined her. It was just the first chapter in a much larger story. "Ready to go home?" Arthur asked. Placing a hand gently on her shoulder, Lena turned, leaving the shadows of the past behind, and looked up at the face of the man who had become her family. She smiled, a full, true smile that finally reached her eyes. "Yes," she said, "let's go home."